5. The diner manager got in her face before she even ordered coffee, naked at her dog, like it was a weapon, called the deputy. 5. And when the uniformed officer showed up and told her to get out, Maya Carter almost locked. Then every muscle in the dog's body locked. Her nose dropped toward the kitchen and her tail went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Maya had seen that posture once before in Kandahar, 3 seconds before a building exploded. 5. If you want to find out what Raven detected and what these men almost cost everyone in that diner, follow my channel so you don't miss a single second. Pop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. 5. From Millhaven Regional to anywhere felt like peeling tape off a wound, slow, deliberate, slightly painful. Maya Carter had been on her feet for 14 hours straight, her scrub still carrying the faint antiseptic smell of the hospital's ICU wing, her hair pulled into a knot that had started the day tight and was now mostly optimistic. 5. She was not hungry exactly, but her body had reached that particular phase of exhaustion where it stopped distinguishing between hunger and every other unpleasant sensation and just broadcast a general distress signal, like food. Sit. Stop moving. Redwood Grill appeared on the right side of Route 9 like most roadside diners appear suddenly without ceremony, its red neon sign buzzing against the gray Tennessee afternoon. The parking lot held maybe a dozen vehicles, a few semis, a pickup with a hunting rack, 2 compact cars near the entrance. Nothing unusual. Maya pulled her truck into a spot near the far end, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. From the back seat, Raven shifted. I know, Maya said. 5 minutes. The dog settled back down, though her dark eyes stayed open and tracking. Raven was a Belgian Malinois, 5 years old, built like a question mark when she was curious and like a missile when she was working. She had been Maya's since the discharge processing office at Fort Belvoir handed over the paperwork, with the same bureaucratic cheerfulness they used for everything else, as if the dog had simply been checked out of a library. Maya had not found that funny at the time. She found most things less funny after the last deployment. There was something the VA counselor called an area for continued growth, which Maya privately considered one of the more optimistic phrases she had ever encountered. She clipped Raven's vest, the green one with the certification patches and the laminated ID tag that said Working K9, and walked toward the diner. The bell above the door was the cheerful kind. Everything else in Redwood Grill was the kind of place that had been exactly the same for 30 years and intended to stay that way. Laminate countertops, red vinyl booths, a chalkboard special for meatloaf, coffee brewing in a glass pot that had probably never been fully clean. It smelled like grease and something sweet, pie maybe, and the ambient noise was low, a handful of afternoon customers, the sound of something frying in the back, country music, low on a radio that nobody was listening to. Maya chose a booth near the window. Raven settled under the table, her head resting on her front paws, eyes still moving. A waitress appeared, young, maybe 22, with a name tag that said Brie, and the specific brand of oint that came from a long shift in customers who had not been kind about it. What can I get? Brie started, then stopped. Her eyes went to Raven, and back to Maya. Sorry, ma'am. We don't allow. She's a working dog. Maya said certified military detection K9. I can show you the documentation. Brie looked uncomfortable, hostile, uncomfortable. The kind of uncomfortable that meant someone else was about to become hostile on her behalf. That someone appeared from the back hallway before Maya had finished the sentence. Hamtique was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the build of a man who had once been physically imposing and had since converted most of that into something harder to categorize. He wore a manager's polo and the expression of a man who made most of his decisions in the first 3 seconds, spent the rest of his time defending them. He came around the counter with his arms already slightly out, the way people do when they want their body language to do their arguing before their mouth gets there. Problem, he said, looking at Brie. She's got a dog, Brie said, which was accurate, and also not quite the whole story. Looked at Raven, then at Maya, then at Raven again. Allow pets. She's not a pet, Maya said. She kept her voice level. She had learned a long time ago that raising her voice in the first 30 seconds of a confrontation never helped, and she was too tired to relearn that lesson today. She's a certified working K9, former military. She's allowed in public accommodations under federal law. I don't care what she is, Pike said. She's a dog. I've got customers who might have allergies or... Do any of your current customers have documented allergies? That's not the point. That's exactly the point, Maya said. If you're invoking health considerations, you'd need an actual documented concern. A federal ADA provisions apply, Pike tightened. Whatever he had expected from the woman in the scrubs with the tired eyes, it was not that. He glanced around the diner. A few customers had looked up from their food, the low-grade attention of people who sense friction without wanting to be involved in it. I'm going to need you to take the animal outside, Pike said. Maya looked at him for a moment, not challenging, just looking. She had spent enough time in situations where men with authority in small spaces decided they needed to demonstrate it, and she had learned that sometimes the look itself, steady, patient, not impressed, communicated more than any argument. If to call the Department of Justice and confirm the legal framework, she said, I'm happy to wait. She set her order in front of Bree without looking at her coffee, the meatloaf special, whatever came with it. Went to the phone behind the counter. He did not call the Department of Justice. He called Derek Sloan. Deputy Derek Sloan arrived 11 minutes later, which told Maya two things. He was either already nearby or he drove fast to get here. He was younger than she expected, maybe 32, 33, with the kind of confidence that came from wearing a uniform in a county where people mostly did what you told them. He came through the door, up to the room, ended on Maya, and walked directly to her booth. I'm going to need you to step outside. Deputy Maya kept her hands flat on the table. I have documentation for the dog. She's a certified military working dog. Mr. Pike has the right to determine what's allowed in his establishment. In most circumstances, yes, but federal law. He said it the way people say it when they mean stop talking. I'm not going to argue the law with you right now. What I'm telling you is that the manager of this business has asked you to leave, and I'm asking you to leave. If you'd like to pursue a complaint, I'd like to finish my coffee. There was a pause. Sloan looked at her the way people look at things that aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I don't want this to become a problem, he said. It doesn't have to be, Maya agreed. The two statements were technically compatible and practically not, and both of them knew it. Sloan set his hand on the back of the booth, not touching her. Just present, the physical punctuation of authority asserted without quite being exercised. Outside, ma'am, please. Maya looked at her coffee. She had not touched it yet. It was still steaming. She had been on her feet for 14 hours. She had driven 40 minutes, and the coffee was still steaming. She picked up her jacket. She began to slide out of the booth. And Raven stood up, not in the casual stretching way a dog stands when it follows its person. The Malinois came to her feet with the abrupt total attention of an animal that has just processed something the humans in the room have not yet registered. Her posture changed. It was not dramatic. Not the raised hackles of a dog that is frightened or aggressive. It was something more controlled, more specific. Her nose went down. Her head tracked left toward the kitchen. Her body went still in the way that very few things go still, the way. A gyroscope's stills orientation locked. Every other movement sacrificed in service of the one thing it is measuring. I forgot the coffee, Raven, she said quietly. Not a command. A question. The dog not fast. Deliberate, precise, pulling toward the kitchen hallway with a purposefulness that had nothing to do with food smells or curiosity. It was the walk of an animal following an invisible thread that only she could perceive, the kind of focused, deviating movement that Maya had seen in combat situations when the dog had detected something that could not be allowed to exist in a space where human beings were standing. Don't, Maya said. Her voice had changed. Louder. Harder, the specific quality of a voice that has given orders in situations where hesitation had a body count. She was already moving after Raven, ma'am. You need to stop. She's alerting, Maya said without turning around. That is a military-trained detection alert. I need you to start clearing this building. Excuse me, evacuate. Now that's the action I need you to take. Sloan looked at Pike. Pike looked at Raven. Raven had stopped beside a large plastic trash container positioned near the emergency exit at the back of the kitchen, a utilitarian gray container, the kind that exists in every commercial kitchen in the country, remarkable and invisible, in the way that ordinary objects become invisible through repetition. The dog sat, not a casual sit. The trained, formal, motionless sit that the military calls a passive alert, the signal that says, here, this place, this object, and that every handler learns to read the way you learn to read a vital sign in a patient who cannot speak. Aya stopped. She looked at the container. She looked at Raven. Her stomach dropped. She had seen this alert once before. Once. In the field outside a compound in Kandahar province, when Raven had been attached to a unit Maya was providing medical support for, and the dog had stopped beside a wall that looked like every other wall, and 37 seconds later the EOD team had pulled enough ordnance out of it to take down the building and the two buildings adjacent. Everyone out, Maya said. She turned to face the kitchen staff, two cooks, a dishwasher Bree who had followed from the front. Out. Right now, go out the front entrance. Stay away from the building. That is. One of the cooks started out, she said. Ike. The word landed with no room around it. The cooks moved. Ike. People almost always move when someone speaks with that particular combination of calm and absolute certainty. It is a sound the body recognizes before the mind processes the logic. Bree was already through the kitchen door. Sloan had followed Maya into the kitchen. He was looking at the trash container with the expression of a man being asked to accept something his framework had not prepared him for. You can't just, I'm not touching it, Maya said. She stepped back from Raven, maintaining distance from the container. I'm not going anywhere near it. I need you to call this as in bomb squad hazmat. Whatever your county protocol is for an IED alert, that protocol starts right now. You're telling me I'm telling you, my dog has given a passive alert on that container, and she has never false alerted in 4 years of service. Call it in. She met his eyes. If I'm wrong, you tell your supervisor I caused a false alarm and I'll deal with whatever comes from that. I'm right. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Call it in. Something moved behind Sloane's eyes. Not full belief. Not yet, but enough to override the instinct to push back, enough to tip the calculation toward what if she's right, instead of who does she think she is. He reached for his radio. Maya put her hand on Raven's vest, not pulling her away, just present, just the connection of handler and dog, and walked backward toward the kitchen door, keeping her eyes on the container. Quietly. Good girl. The next 12 minutes were the kind that compress and expand simultaneously in memory. Some moments stretching to fill far more than their actual duration, others collapsing to a single image. On the radio, his voice. Careful now. Professional, the shift in his posture that happened when he stopped being the authority in a room and became the person relaying a situation to someone with more authority. Outside in the parking lot, his arms crossed, still cycling through something that looked like disbelief. It was beginning to look like something he was less equipped to name. Lines. The afternoon customers gathered on the far side of Route 9, some of them checking their phones, some watching the building with the uncertain attention of bystanders, at an event that has not yet Maya stood at the edge of the parking lot with Raven at her side. She had retrieved the dog's water bottle from her truck and filled the collapsible bowl that lived in her jacket pocket, one of the first habits she had built around Raven, before almost anything else you watered the dog. Ian drank without urgency, ears still rotating the ongoing environmental scan that the dog maintained even when apparently at rest. Maya's hands were steady. She noticed this with the mild, distant quality of someone observing data. Her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled, and she was running a very quiet, very focused calculation in the part of her mind that had been trained to remain operational when other parts were doing something more chaotic. Owen appeared beside her. He had his hands in the pockets of his jacket, which she read as a concession, the body closing off its own automatic postures. Coming, he said, Bombsquid State Police. Maybe 20 minutes, good. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him trying to formulate something and not quite arriving at it. Dog, he finally said. She's been trained for this specifically. Passives detection, article search, Athens personnel tracking. Maya said. She's certified through the Department of Defense's military working dog program. The paperwork's in my truck, right? He paused. I didn't know that. When I got here, Pike said there was a dog causing a problem and Pike, you didn't have the full picture, Maya said. It was not an absolution and it was not an accusation, and he seemed to understand that it was neither, which was more sophisticated than she had expected from him based on the first 7 minutes of their acquaintance. People were frequently more complicated than their first 7 minutes. What's her name? He asked. Maya looked at Raven. The dog had finished drinking and was now sitting at perfect attention facing the diner, as though keeping watch was simply the natural state of things. Oven, she said. The bomb squad arrived in 19 minutes. A white van and a state police cruisers followed 3 Trixonets Leeds Lycosent cruiser and an unmarked sedan. Maya watched from the perimeter and noted their movements with the automatic assessment of someone who had spent time around ordnance teams. The way the lead technician approached the building, like the equipment they staged outside the entrance. The cordon the state police established. Was standing 20 feet away from her. He had not apologized. Athens. He was watching the unfolding response with an expression that was somewhere between bewilderment and the early stages of something that had not yet resolved into a recognizable emotion. The state police sergeant approached Maya, late 40s, solid build, the kind of face that had seen enough things to seem being easily surprised by new ones. Who reported this? My dog reported it, Maya said. I called it in. You have handler credentials, truck. I'll get them. She walked to her vehicle, retrieved the folder. She kept in the center console the documentation that she had carried since the day Raven's service paperwork had been transferred to her life, because she had learned within the first 3 weeks of civilian life that carrying documentation was the difference between a conversation and a confrontation. In certification, Raven's service record, Maya's own military discharge papers, and her current nursing license, which she brought out of habit, and because her experience had established that people responded differently to her when they understood the full picture. She handed the folder to the sergeant. He looked through it with the careful attention of someone who reads documents seriously. On medic, he said 4 deployments, Maya said. Last one was Kandahar. He looked at her for a moment. The look. Sloan had given her not the look of a man reassessing a problem. Of someone encountering a fact. You're a nurse now. Of Haven Regional. I was coming off a shift. He handed the folder back. I'll need a statement, of course. He started to walk away, then stopped. Bug's alert, was it a passive alert or active? Maya looked at him. He knew enough to ask the question, which meant he knew enough to understand the answer. Passive, she said. Full stop, no ambiguity. The sergeant nodded once. He walked back toward the diner. 15 minutes later, the lead bomb technician came out of the building and spoke to the sergeant. Maya was too far away to hear the words. She watched the sergeant's face. She watched his posture change, the small but complete shift of someone receiving information that makes the previous situation retroactively larger and more serious than it appeared. He turned and looked at her across the parking lot. She already knew what Raven had found. She had known since the moment the dog went still beside the trash container, since the moment she recognized the quality of that particular stillness, specific geometry of every trained muscle holding its position, because the message was too important to allow any movement to obscure it. Had been right. She was always right. And the building full of people behind them, the customers who had been eating meatloaf and drinking coffee and not thinking about anything more threatening than the drive home, had been 40 feet away from something that would have ended all of those ordinary, unremarkable plans permanently. Maya stood in the parking lot with her hand resting lightly on Raven's back. The dog was warm under her palm, breathing steady, watching the building with the patient vigilance of an animal that did not know it, had just saved a room full of strangers, and would not have understood the concept if you tried to explain it. The parking lot was filling with vehicles and personnel, and the organized, purposeful activity of a situation that had stopped being a local dispute and become something that required the state's attention. Was somewhere behind her. Pike was still standing near the entrance, but his arms were no longer crossed. The sergeant was walking back toward Maya, and behind him, through the diner's plate glass window, she could see the bomb technicians moving with the careful, deliberate pace of people working around something that required them to be right on every single step. She waited. Raven waited with her. The afternoon light was going gray at the edges, the way Tennessee light did in late fall, and somewhere behind the tree line, the sun was dropping toward an invisible horizon. And it was quiet in the particular way that places go quiet when the ordinary world has paused to make room for something it did not expect. The sergeant stopped in front of her. Miss Carter, he said. Sergeant. He looked at Raven, then back at her. The expression on his face was not one she could categorize easily. It had several things in it that didn't usually appear together. The technician found something in that container, he said. We're treating it as a confirmed device. The words landed in the quiet of the parking lot with a weight that was not dramatic, that did not announce itself. Just the flat factual weight of a thing that had been true all along and was now known to be true. They're still working, he said, but I need you to keep yourself and the dog well back from the building. He paused. We're also going to need to extend our perimeter. How far? He told her. Maya nodded. She looked at the diner, at the plate glass window at the tables, where people had been sitting 40 minutes ago with no awareness of what was 30 feet from their coffee cups. The people who were inside, she said, are they being assessed? Some of them may be in shock. The sergeant blinked. Something in his expression shifted the specific, almost involuntary adjustment of someone who has been thinking about one thing and has just been redirected toward a thing they had not yet gotten to. I'll get someone to check on them. I can help with that, Maya said. If it would be useful. I'm a registered nurse. I have my kit in the truck. He looked at her for a moment. Right now I need you back from the perimeter. Understood. She moved back. Raven moved with her, close and steady, the dog's shoulder warm against her leg. From somewhere further along the highway, another set of emergency lights was approaching, more vehicles, larger ones, and Maya could make out the configuration of equipment on the second van that suggested this was not going to resolve quickly. touched Raven's ears. The dog was still tracking something. Slightly angled toward the tree line to the east of the parking lot, ears at the alert position, that subtle intensification of attention that was not yet a full alert, but was not nothing. Maya followed the line of the dog's attention toward the far end of the lot, toward a dark blue sedan that had been there when she arrived, and that she had not looked at twice, had not had any reason to look at twice, parked at the outer edge of the lot in the last row, half in the shadow of the tree line. She looked at the car, she looked at Raven. The dog's ears were fully forward now. Maya put her hand on Raven's vest and felt the dog's body, the tension in it, the readiness, the coiled attention of an animal that has picked up a thread and is deciding whether the thread is worth pulling. And Raven's nose dropped and her tail went still. Ivan's nose hit the ground and stayed there. It was not the casual sniffing of a dog following a scent out of curiosity. It was the locked, committed tracking posture of an animal that had found the thread and was now pulling it, the kind of movement that had a destination already decided, the body just covering the distance between here and there. Aya felt it through the vest, the moment it happened. The shift in the dog's center of gravity, the way Raven's hindquarters dropped slightly as the nose engaged fully, and the rest of the dog reorganized itself around that single point of focus. Aya tightened her grip on the vest handle, not pulling back. Just holding the connection easy, she said very quietly. Fine. Show me. Raven moved in a straight line toward the dark blue sedan at the edge of the lot. Aya moved with her. She did not run. Running changed things. It drew attention in the wrong way. It escalated the energy of the dog. It gave whatever she was moving toward more time to process what was happening. She walked with the focused, controlled pace of someone covering ground with purpose. Her eyes on the sedan, tracking the perimeter, the state police officers to her left, the bomb technicians visible through the diner window, of displaced customers on the far side of the highway. The sedan was dark blue, older model, the kind of car that belonged to no particular decade with any commitment. The rear passenger window had a crack running from the lower left corner toward the center. One of the back tires was slightly low. There was nothing on the seats that she could see from this angle, no bag, no equipment, nothing that broadcast itself as significant. Ivan stopped beside the rear passenger door. She sat. Complete, formal, immovable, passive alert. Maya's hand went to her phone. She did not touch the car. She did not lean in to look through the window. She took 3 steps back, maintaining the angle she needed to keep the vehicle and the sergeant in her sightline simultaneously, and she called across the open space of the parking lot with the calibrated volume of someone who needs to be heard clearly without triggering a panic response in the 20-odd people standing within earshot. Sergeant, I need you over here right now. He turned from the conversation he was having with the state police lieutenant. Something in her voice, not the volume, the quality of it made him move without asking why. That was the thing about a certain kind of controlled urgency. People who had spent time around real emergencies recognized it, even when they couldn't have explained what they were hearing. He covered the distance in about 10 seconds. He looked at Maya. At Raven. He said, same alert, she confirmed. Full stop. He was already reaching for his radio. What happened next? Happened fast and also not fast at all fast, in the sense that the physical machinery of response moved efficiently. Once it was set in motion, not fast, in the sense that each individual second between actions seemed to have additional weight to it. The sergeant cleared the perimeter around the sedan in under 3 minutes, which required relocating the cluster of customers further along the highway shoulder and repositioning 2 of the state police cruisers to extend the cordon. The bomb technicians were notified. The lead tech came out of the diner and walked to the Seine with the same careful, deliberate pace she had watched him use approaching the building. Aya stood 30 yards back with Raven at her side and watched. Owen appeared beside her. He had been somewhere in the cluster of activity for the past 30 minutes, and she had not tracked him specifically, which was a sign of how thoroughly her attention had reorganized itself around the situation rather than the individuals in it. An alert, he said. Yes, on the car. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him assessing something, not the tactical situation. He was leaving that to people above his pay grade now, but something more personal, some internal adjustment that was still mid-process. How long has the car been there, he asked. I don't know, Maya said. It was there when I arrived. I didn't note the time and I wasn't looking at it specifically. I'll see if we can pull the security footage from the... He stopped. The diner has a camera at the entrance. I'll see if it covers the lot. He moved away. Maya watched the bomb technician approach the sedan with the sensor wand and thought about the timing, about the fact that she had arrived at the diner at approximately 2:40 in the afternoon, and it was now nearly 4:15, which meant that whatever was or was not in that car had been in the parking lot of a diner full of afternoon customers for at least 90 minutes before Raven found it. She thought about the 43 people the state police sergeant had counted when they cleared the building. She thought about what the blast radius of a pipe bomb in an enclosed kitchen would have done to those 43 people. She stopped thinking about it. That particular line of thought was not useful right now, and she had trained herself to recognize the point at which a thought stopped producing information and started consuming resources she needed for other things. Raven was a small, deliberate movement, the dog's shoulder warm and solid against her calf, and Maya was not sure whether it was something Raven did for her own comfort or for Maya's life, and she had long since concluded that the distinction probably didn't matter. "Good girl," she said. The lead technician straightened up from the sedan's rear passenger side and spoke into his radio. He did not look alarmed. He did not look relieved either. He looked like someone describing a set of facts to someone who needed those facts. This walked to Maya within 4 minutes of that radio call. "There's something in the car," he said. She waited. "A compartment. Technician is treating it as a confirmed device, pending full assessment." He paused. "It's not identical to what was in the kitchen, different configuration. Maya absorbed this same maker, different design." "That's what we're trying to determine." He looked at her steadily. "Victor, I need to ask you something directly." Ahead. "Did you have any prior knowledge of what was in that diner today? Any information you received before you stopped here?" "No, you didn't receive a tip." "You weren't directed to this location. I was coming off a 14-hour shift at Millhaven Regional," she said. "I stopped because I needed to eat. I have a receipt from a gas station on Route 9 about 22 miles back if you need to establish my route." He was quiet for a beat, not hostile, assessing. She understood the question, and she understood why he had to ask it. Anyone sitting in his position looking at this situation had to ask it. Often. "Alerted because she's trained to alert," Maya said. "That's all that happened here, I believe you," he said. The way he suggested. He had made the decision and wasn't going to revisit it. I want you to know we're going to need your full statement. Devices, timing. Everything you observed, of course. I may need you to stay in the area for a few hours." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He nodded and walked back toward the cordon. Returned 20 minutes after that, moving with the slightly different energy of someone who has seen something on a screen that has reorganized what they thought they understood about a situation. "Camera covers the lot," he said. "I pulled the footage with the lieutenant. There's a man, white male, maybe 40-45, dark jacket, who left the diner through the main entrance about 19 minutes before you arrived. Walked directly to that blue sedan." Sloan paused. "He got in, sat there for about 4 minutes. Then he got out, went back inside, through the rear entrance into the kitchen, and came back out the front about 6 minutes later." Maya was very still. "He went into the kitchen, we think so. The rear entrance goes directly past the area where Sloan stopped." His voice had gone slightly careful. The way voices go when the thing being described is still in the process of becoming real to the person describing it. "The area where Raven alerted, did he drive away?" "He walked east along the shoulder of Route 9, on foot. There's a secondary road about a quarter mile that way. Doesn't reach it." Maya looked east, the tree line. The direction Raven's ears had been tracking before the alert on the sedan. The dog had known. Before Maya had consciously registered the sedan as a target, Raven had already been tracking something in that direction, the residual scent trail of whoever had been near the car. Whoever had walked back toward the highway on foot. What was in the sedan? She asked. "The technician won't give me a full assessment yet, but I heard enough." He looked at her directly. "It's more than what was in the kitchen, Maya." He had used her first name. She noticed it. She didn't think it was calculated. It was the kind of thing that happens when a situation strips the social formalities down to something more basic. Let it pass. If the first device was a distraction, let it slowly, talking through it out loud, or a test. The parked outside. Sloan said, following the same logic. Exposure, larger area. Was there anything in the diner footage that indicated where he came from before the diner? We're working on it. The state police have more resources for that than I do. He rubbed the back of his neck. I called. For mutual aid from the county. There are 2 more units coming. An ATF has been notified. They're sending someone from Nashville. ATF. Maya processed that federal involvement changed the architecture of the investigation. It meant the resources went up, and the jurisdictional question resolved itself in a direction that would take local control out of play. That was probably the right call. She was not sentimentally attached to local control. Laughed. "How are the customers doing?" she asked. He blinked the same involuntary redirect she had triggered in the sergeant earlier, the moment where someone who has been thinking about explosives is asked to think about people. Some of them are pretty shaken up. There's a woman who is sitting with 2 kids. She keeps asking if they're safe to leave. "I should be assessed before they leave," Maya said. Best response, especially in children, doesn't always present immediately. "Is there any medical support on scene? An ambulance is staged about half a mile back." Nice. "That's not the same as having someone walk through the group." She looked at him. "I can do it." "I've got my kit," the sergeant said. "Stay back from the perimeter. The customers are on the highway shoulder. That's within my movement range." She was already assessing the distance. 3 minutes. "I'll screen them and flag anyone who needs the ambulance." Looked like a man who was running out of reasons to say no and was not entirely sure he had wanted to say no in the first place. "Don't cross the tape," he said finally. She retrieved her kit from the truck, a go bag she had never fully stopped carrying because old habits from the field had a specific gravity that civilian life did not fully counteract. Ivan walked beside her to the group of displaced customers with the same calm she maintained in every situation, attentive, quiet, the dog's presence itself a kind of stabilizing signal to the people around her. The way that steadiness in one creature can bleed into the nervous systems of others. The woman with 2 children was sitting on the guardrail, her arms around both kids, a boy who looked about 9 and a girl maybe 6. She looked up when Maya approached, and her face did the thing faces do when they're trying to decide whether to hold it together or let go. "Are you with?" She started. "I'm a nurse," Maya said. She crouched down so she was at the kid's eye level. "I'm just going to check in with everyone, make sure you're all doing okay." My boy looked at Raven with wide eyes. "Is that a police dog?" Maya said. "Her name's Raven. She's the one who figured out something was wrong." She found the bomb. The mother made a small controlled sound. "She found something that wasn't supposed to be there," Maya said. "And she told me about it. That's her job." The boy stared at Raven with the particular intensity of a child encountering something that has upgraded the scale of his understanding of the world. Ivan, for her part, regarded him with the patient, watchful attention she gave most things, and after a moment she sat down, which seemed to constitute an invitation of some kind, because the boy slid off the guardrail and walked toward her with the careful reverence of someone approaching something important. "Pet her?" he asked Maya, not taking his eyes off the dog. "Ask her first." Maya said, "Hold out your hand, palm down. Let her come to you." He did exactly that with the seriousness of a child following instructions for something that matters. Buchan leaned forward and sniffed his hand. Then she rested her chin on his palm. The boy looked back at his mother with an expression of absolute and uncomplicated joy. His mother pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. She nodded once at Maya, a gesture that carried more than it looked like it carried the compressed weight of something she could not have put into a sentence right then. Maya moved through the group. 15 customers, 4 kitchen staff, Brie and another waitress, older man, who had been eating alone and was now sitting very still in the way that people sit when they are processing something by refusing to let their body do anything until their mind catches up. She assessed each of them with the quick, thorough attention that 14 months in a combat medical role had built into her, without her entirely choosing it. Checking breathing, checking color, checking the eyes, asking small questions, and listening to how the answers came, whether the voice was flat or had too much air under it or was coming too fast. People. She flagged for the ambulance team, the older man, a younger woman whose hands had not stopped shaking in a fine and constant tremor since Maya had sat down beside her, and one of the kitchen staff who was breathing too shallowly and had that particular quality of stillness that sometimes preceded a vasovagal response. She walked them each to the ambulance staging point herself, Raven beside her, and handed them off with a concise clinical summary to the paramedic who met them at the tape line. The paramedic was young. He looked at Maya's scrubs and her kit and Raven's vest, and then at the handoff information she had given him, which she had organized in the standard SBR format she used at Millhaven Regional, and the expression on his face went through 2 or 3 rapid recalibrations. "You're not with the response team," he said, nursed from Millhaven Regional. "Was at the diner when the alert happened? You assessed all of them?" 15 customers, and 5 staff, 3 flagged, the rest are stable. "The older gentleman is likely in delayed shock. He's been very quiet and his blood pressure is going to be lower than he'll tell you. It usually is." The woman I have second is showing signs of an acute stress response, probably needs to be seen and then released with follow-up instructions. The man in the kitchen staff watches breathing. It's improving, but he was hyperventilating about 4 minutes ago. The paramedic was writing on his clipboard. He had stopped looking like he was trying to figure out who she was and had started looking like someone receiving useful information. Copy, he said. She walked back. Had continued its shift toward early evening, the sky above the tree line going from gray to a muted orange at the edges, the kind of Tennessee dusk that happened while you weren't paying attention. The scene in the parking lot had continued to develop in her absence. 2 more state police for a third unmarked citizen, and a dark blue SUV that had ATF written on it in the understated way federal vehicles have of announcing themselves. Aman, in a dark jacket, climbed out of the ATF vehicle. 30s, maybe 40, dark hair. Pulled back the kind of economical physical presence that suggests someone who had stopped spending energy on unnecessary things a long time ago. She spoke briefly with the sergeant. Then her eyes swept the scene and landed on Maya with the focused quality of someone who had been given a description and was confirming a match. Over Maya Carter? Yes, Special Agent Dana Reyes, ATF Nashville Field Office. She did not extend her hand. Unfriendly. Just efficient. I've been briefed on what your dog found. I need to hear it from you directly, Maya told her. All of it. The arrival, Pike, Sloan Raven's first alert in the kitchen, the evacuation, the second alert on the sedan, the security footage Sloan had described. She told it without editorializing in the sequence it happened. The way she wrote incident reports at the hospital, chronological, factual, no interpretation embedded in the description. The facts carry the shape of the thing. Reyes listened without interrupting. She took notes on a small pad pen moving in quick, abbreviated strokes. When Maya finished, Reyes looked up. The dog's first alert was passive both times. No active indication, no scratching, no barking. Passive alert is the trained response for explosive detection. Not trained to actively indicate near suspected IEDs, the physical contact risk is obvious. Reyes looked at Raven. How many deployments did she have? Kandahar Mosul 1 rotation I'm not going to detail. Maya's expression did not change, but something in her eyes acknowledged the boundary. And you retained her after discharge. I adopted her through the MWD program. 14 months ago. Reyes made a note. Have you had any contact with anyone who expressed interest in this location? The diner, this stretch of Route 9, anything in Ashford County? Know anyone who would have reason to know your travel route today? I paused. I don't have a fixed route home from the hospital. I take different roads. But you ended up here random stop, Maya said. I was hungry. The sign was visible from the road. I studied her for a moment. The study was not hostile, but it was thorough. I believe you, she said finally, in the same tone the sergeant had used, the tone of someone who has made a decision. I want to keep you available for the next several hours. We're going to need formal statements, and I may have additional questions once my team has fully assessed both devices. I'm not going anywhere, Maya said again. Good. Reyes started to turn away, then stopped. The people who tried to remove you from the diner. The manager and the deputy. What about them? They're going to have a very different afternoon than they expected. She said it without satisfaction, just as a fact. Then she walked back toward the ATF vehicle. Maya stood in the parking lot while the investigation organized itself around her in larger and larger concentric rings. The initial perimeter had now expanded to cover nearly a quarter mile along Route 9 in both directions. And media vehicles had appeared at the outer edge of the roadblock. She could see cameras, the antennae of satellite trucks. Someone had been listening to a scanner or a tip had gone out, and now the machinery of public attention was starting to arrive. She thought about the man on the security footage. Jacket, 40 to 45, who went back inside the kitchen, who walked east along Route 9. She thought about the 2 devices, different configurations, same parking lot, same afternoon. She thought about what Agent Reyes had said. They're going to have a very different afternoon than they expected. She was not thinking about Pike or Sloan when she thought about that sentence. She was thinking about the man in the dark jacket. Whoever he was, he had come here with a plan. He had placed one device in a building full of people and another in a car in the parking lot, and he had walked away on foot, which meant either he had a vehicle staged elsewhere or he had someone waiting, and either way, for finding him was not getting longer. Oven pressed against her leg again. Maya looked down. The dog was looking east, still east, the same direction she had been tracking before. I see it, Maya said quietly. She turned to find Sloan. He was 15 feet away, speaking with one of the state police officers. and she was about to walk toward him when the radio on his belt crackled. And even at this distance, she heard enough of what came through it to feel the ground shift beneath the situation for the third time in 2 hours. She heard her own name, she heard the word connected. And she heard very distinctly the word second suspect. Owen's head came up, and he found her across the space between them with an expression that was no longer the careful recalibration of a man adjusting his assumptions. It was something sharper, something that had 2 directions it could go and had not yet resolved into one. Toward her. She stood still and waited, and Raven stood with her, and the dog's ears were fully forward, fully alert, tracking something in the evening air that none of the humans around them had yet been able to name. Stopped 3 feet from her and did not speak immediately, which told her the thing he was about to say was still being organized in his head, and he was a man who did not like delivering half-formed information. There's a second person, he said. I heard that much. She was inside the diner. She left about 4 minutes before you arrived. The camera caught her leaving through the main entrance, different direction from the man. She was sitting in a booth near the window for about 40 minutes before that. Processed this. She and the man were both inside at the same time. For about 12 of those 40 minutes. Yes, they didn't sit together. They didn't appear to interact. He paused, but they left within about 15 minutes of each other, and right now the ATF team is treating them as potentially coordinated. What does she look like? Female, maybe late 30s. Dark coat, light hair. The camera resolution isn't great. They're enhancing the footage. Sloane's jaw worked slightly. The thing is, she didn't get into a vehicle. The camera shows her walking south along the highway. South, away from where the man had gone east. Actions of 2 people. The same window of time. Off the same building. Thought about the distance from the diner to the nearest intersection. The secondary road Sloane had mentioned the coverage gaps in a county camera system that had not been designed for this kind of investigation. Was Reyes? No, Maya asked. She's being briefed right now. As if on cue, Reyes appeared from the direction of the ATF vehicle with her phone at her ear, and the particular forward-leaning posture of someone moving toward a problem while still managing 3 other problems simultaneously. She caught Maya's eye as she passed, 2 fingers pointed down. Then a short horizontal movement that might have meant stay there, or might have meant something more specific that Maya interpreted as, don't go anywhere, I'll need you. She stayed. Raven was still looking east. The consistency of it had moved past the stage of interesting and into the stage of relevant, the dog's attention, holding to that fixed point, the way a compass holds to north, regardless of how the surrounding environment shifts. Maya crouched beside her, one hand on the dog's back, and tried to map what she knew against the terrain. She could see the tree line 60 yards out, the secondary road Sloane had mentioned a quarter mile further, and the fading light turning the open ground between the parking lot and the trees into a specific quality of shadow. She thought about the plan. This required 2 devices, 1 building and 1 vehicle. The building device was positioned for maximum enclosed damage. The vehicle device was larger outside, positioned in a lot that a significant number of people would cross to evacuate if the building device detonated first. Not a random placement, not a spontaneous act. This was someone who had thought about sequencing life. She stood up. Sloane was still there. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking the sedan wasn't the vehicle they arrived in, she said. If you arrive at a target location in a vehicle you intend to use as a secondary device, you don't have a way to leave. So there's a 3rd vehicle somewhere, something staged before they got here. He stared at her for a moment, then he was reaching for his radio again. She did not wait to hear the conversation. She walked toward Reyes, who had ended her phone call and was now standing with the state police lieutenant and a second ATF agent who had arrived in a car. Maya had not noticed a younger man with a laptop bag and the specific coloring of someone who spent most of his time indoors looking at screens. Yes, Maya said. Reyes turned. The suspects didn't arrive in the sedan, Maya said. It's a secondary device, not a transport vehicle. They needed a way to get here and a way to leave. There's at least 1 more vehicle that was staged before they arrived, probably along one of the secondary roads. A man walked east. The woman walked south. Those directions may not be their actual destinations. They could have doubled back through tree cover. Reyes looked at her for 3 seconds. The look of someone being told something. They hadn't considered the look of someone confirming that their own line of thinking had a parallel in someone else's. Henderson, she said to the younger agent. He was already opening the laptop. Pull the secondary road coverage east of this location and south. Anything within a mile and a half. We're looking for a parked vehicle that doesn't belong on it. Reyes looked back at Maya. You have a tactical background beyond the medic role. I was embedded with combat units long enough to understand how operational planning works, Maya said. I'm not an analyst. But some things are logic problems more than expertise problems. Some things are, Reyes agreed. She looked at Raven. Dog is still tracking east. She's been holding that orientation since before I called the second alert. Whatever scent trail. The man left when he walked out of the lot. She's still on it. Reyes was quiet for a moment. I can't authorize a civilian handler to lead a track in an active investigation. I'm not asking for authorization, Maya said. I'm telling you what my dog is doing and what it might mean. Right. If there's a second vehicle east of here, then a trained dog on a confirmed scent trail is faster than a ground search with flashlights in falling light. It was in fact falling. It had gone from the muted orange of early dusk to a gray that would become real dark within the next 40 minutes, and 40 minutes in open terrain with partial tree cover, and a suspect who had a 90-minute head start was a significant constraint. Yes. Turned to the state police lieutenant. What's your air asset status? Helicopter is staged in Clarkston 22 minutes out. Get it moving. She turned back to Maya. I still can't put you in the field. But if you can tell me which direction the dog's strongest indication is pointing. 5. She's been fixed on the eastern tree line since the second alert, Maya said. Accent. No variation, East Reyes said. She said it to the lieutenant. Concentrate. Your ground units along the eastern secondary roads first. Helicopters makes the southern corridor on arrival. Lieutenant moved. The next 20 minutes were the particular organized chaos of a multi-agency response. Stride. The phase where the initial shock of a situation has resolved enough that people know their assignments, but the outcome is still entirely open. Maya stayed at the perimeter. She had been asked to stay, and she stayed, not because she couldn't have found a reason to move, but because she had learned that the most effective thing she could do in most situations was understand what her role actually was and operate within it precisely, rather than exceeding it, and creating friction that cost more than the value she added. 5. Her role right now was witness, source of information, and handler of the only confirmed explosives detection asset on the scene. She did all three without generating problems. I appeared from somewhere in the cluster of displaced customers and stopped a few feet from Maya with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a sentence and is now not sure it was the right sentence. I'm sorry, Bree said for before. When I went to get Mr. I didn't. I wasn't trying to. You were doing your job, Maya said. You went to your manager. That's what you're supposed to do. I knew the dog was probably a service dog. I just didn't want to deal with Pike if I got it wrong. She looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who has recognized the decision they made was small and its consequences were accidentally large. That's not a good reason. No, Maya said. It's not. Right. But it's a human reason. She looked at her. You left when I told you to. You didn't argue. You didn't freeze. You got the kitchen staff out. 5. Bree blinked. She had apparently not included that in her accounting of herself. You did the thing that mattered when it mattered, Maya said. That's not nothing. Bree opened her mouth and then closed it. She nodded once tightly and walked back toward the guardrail where the other displaced staff were clustered. Maya watched her go and thought that guilt was a peculiar burden. It sought out the moments where a person had made a small understandable failure and then refused to acknowledge anything adjacent to it that was not that failure. Was standing near the front of the extended perimeter, 20 feet from the diner entrance that was still behind crime scene tape. He had been there for the past hour, largely stationary, a man watching the investigation of something that had happened in his building. He had not approached Maya. She had not approached him. There was a conversation that would eventually have to happen between them, and both of them seemed to understand by mutual unspoken agreement that it was not going to happen in the middle of this. Came back to her at the 40-minute mark, moving with the particular contained energy of someone carrying news. They found the vehicle, he said. She turned to face him fully. Street access road about a mile and a half east. Truck. Plates come back to a rental out of Nashville. The state police have it contained. They set up a perimeter before anyone approached. Sign of the suspects. Not yet. The helicopter is making passes, and ground units are working outward from the truck. He paused. There's something else. ATF ran the partial plate from the sedan, the blue one in the lot. It's registered to a name that put up a flag in a federal. Wouldn't tell me which database, but she went very quiet in a way that I am reading as significant. Flag, Maya said. Prior contact. That's all she said. which meant someone in this investigation had an existing relationship with federal law enforcement, whether as a subject, a person of interest, or something else that had generated enough documentation to exist in a searchable form. That was a different category of situation from a spontaneous act of violence. That was a history. She thought about the two devices, the craft of them, the positioning, the sequencing. The patients required to sit in a diner for 40 minutes and walk out without hurrying. Ice. Said second suspect, Maya said she used the word coordinated. She did a coordinated attack on a rural diner on a state highway with no obvious symbolic value. She was thinking out loud, which was a habit she had never fully broken. Occasion isn't random. Something about this diner or this stretch of Route 9 is specific. One was quiet for a moment. Pike's been in business here for 16 years. Does he have enemies? Legal disputes, property issues, anything? I don't know. I don't really know, Pike beyond. He stopped. I can ask. I know his neighbor, actually. She's on the county council. Ask. Maya said he moved away. Raven had finally broken her fixed eastward orientation. Scent trail was dissipating in the cooling evening air. Whatever, had been maintaining her attention along that axis, had resolved when the truck was found, and was now sitting at Ma's left side, watching the scene with the calm rotation of her environmental survey. Her breathing was easy. She had done what she was built to do, and she was not debriefing herself about it. Dogs did not carry the cognitive overhead of outcome anxiety in the way that humans did, and Maya had occasionally found this quality in Raven to be one of the more stabilizing things in her life. Appeared at her elbow without a great deal of preamble. 9. The man from the security footage, she said, we have a tentative ID. 5. I'm not going to give you his name, but I'm going to tell you that this is connected to a property dispute that has been in litigation for 3 years. 9. Sits on land that is the subject of a contested inheritance case. Inherited it from a previous owner. The previous owner had family members who believed the will was fraudulent. I stared at her. Someone tried to bomb a diner over a property dispute. People have done worse over less. Reyes's voice was flat, dismissive, factual. The case has been in circuit court. Pike. There have been threatening communications. Pike reported one of them about 18 months ago, and local law enforcement. She glanced briefly in Sloane's direction, though he was out of earshot. Local law enforcement filed it and didn't follow up. The shape of it was becoming visible now. The way a photograph develops the gray resolution into contrast, the contrast into specific forms. Someone sent Pike a threat. Someone in the county had received that report and put it in a drawer. And today a man in a dark jacket had walked into a kitchen. The federal database flag. The registered owner of the sedan has a prior arrest on a federal explosives violation, Reyes said. Touches were reduced. He completed probation. She looked directly at Maya. We're treating him as the primary suspect for device construction. And the woman, unknown. That's honest. We don't have enough to give you a profile on her yet. She was the lookout. Maya said 40 minutes in the diner positioned at the window booth. She could see the parking lot. She could see the entrance. If anything changed, if someone noticed something, if someone seemed like a problem, she was positioned to signal. Was quiet for a moment. That's consistent with the footage timeline. She left when the kitchen work was done. She would have signaled him when the coast was clear. That's what my team is working on. Phone records, tower pings. Whatever connects those two in the right window. There was a burst of radio traffic from the direction of the ATF vehicle. His head came up. She put her hand to her earpiece and listened, and Maya watched her face, watched the specific sequence of changes that moved across it as she processed what she was hearing. The compression around the eyes, the slight forward movement of her posture. Excuse me, Ray said. She walked quickly toward the vehicle. Maya stood still and counted. She had learned this from a field surgeon during her second deployment. When something is happening that you cannot affect, count to 60 before assuming it's the worst version of what it might be. It gave the situation time to resolve while giving her mind something concrete to do instead of filling the gap with catastrophe. She got to 31 before Sloane came running, not jogging. The difference mattered. They found him, he said, and he was breathing harder than the distance from the ATF vehicle to where she was standing should have required. The primary suspect. He was at the access road east side. He didn't get to the truck. The ground units cut him off. Is he in custody? Not yet. He has something. Sloane's voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, a tight high quality that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, but lived in the space adjacent to both. They think he has a device on him. But The word landed in the cooling air of the parking lot, and every other sound in Maya's immediate environment went to a kind of secondary processing. The way sounds go secondary when something more important requires the foreground. How close is he to the perimeter? She asked. About 600 yards east, the access road. How many officers in contact? 3 state police. They have him contained, but he's not complying, and he has his hand in his jacket, and they're not sure what he has. 600 yards. 3 officers. A man with his hand in his jacket and a history of explosives violations and a day that had not gone to plan, which was the specific combination of circumstances that produced the most unpredictable human behavior. Maya asked. County doesn't have one on roster. They're trying to reach a state crisis negotiator, but the timeline is long. 45 minutes. Minimum. She did the arithmetic that no one wanted to do. 600 yards. 3 officers. Volatile subject. 45 minutes. Falling dark. 5. These numbers did not combine into a stable outcome. 5. Is there cover? She asked, for the officers partial. The tree line gives them some. But the suspect is in an open section of the access road. 9. If he detonates anything at that distance, Sloan stopped himself. Last radius of a pipe bomb, varied with construction and charge, but at 600 yards from the diner with a secondary device already confirmed larger than the first. If he was carrying something comparable to the car device, officers at 30 feet were in a lethal zone. Officers at 30 feet knew this. The suspect knew this. The negotiating leverage that knowledge created ran in a complicated direction. IS needs a medical asset staged closer, Maya said. Ambulance staged a half-mile back closer. She can't put. If those 3 officers need medical support and the ambulance is half a mile back, the response time is not acceptable. She was already running the calculations. I'm not going into the active zone. I'm saying a medical asset needs to be at 300 yards. She looked at him directly. I'm the medical asset that's here. Looked at her with an expression that had somewhere underneath it the ghost of the man who had come into the diner 80 minutes ago to tell her to leave. That man was mostly gone now. What was left was something more functional, more honest, and considerably more uncomfortable. I'll have to clear it with Reyes, he said. Then go clear it. Leg. Raven pressed against Maya's leg. Not the steadying lean of a dog that needs reassurance, the deliberate contact of a dog that is calibrating the situation around it and choosing to maintain close physical reference with its handler. Maya put her hand on the dog's back and felt the warmth of her, the steadiness of her breathing, the quality of attention that the Malinois directed at the eastern tree line where 600 yards away. 3 people were standing in a standoff with a man who had spent the day trying to kill strangers over a piece of land. Appeared at a near run, which Maya had not yet seen from the agent. I told you on a stage forward, Reyes said, 300 yards. I'll stay off the access road. I'll stay behind whatever cover is available. I won't approach the subject or the officers unless I'm called forward. If he detonates 300 yards from a hand-carried device, gives me cover behind the tree line. 9. No blast dynamics. Reyes looked at her. The assessment was fast and thorough, and Maya stood still for it. You were not supposed to be here today, Reyes said. For meatloaf. Yes. And now you're the most useful person on my scene. Maya didn't answer that. There wasn't really an answer to it. 300 yards, Reyes said, behind the tree line. You do not advance without direct radio authorization from me. If this goes sideways, you stay down until the scene is clear. Agreed. Agreed. Henderson will give you a radio. She looked at Raven. The dog stays with you. The dog always stays with me. There was a fraction of a pause in Reyes's expression that on a different face might have been something approaching a smile. Then she was moving again. And Maya was moving. And Raven was at her side. And the eastern tree line was 600 yards away, and every yard of the distance between where she was standing and where this was going to resolve itself was ground she was going to have to cross in the next 4 minutes, while it continued, its merciless shift toward dark. She had gone 40 meters from the perimeter tape when she heard a sound that stopped her completely. An explosion, a voice amplified. Coming from a portable speaker system one of the state police units had apparently staged at the edge of the access road, The kind of field expedient public address that law enforcement used when they needed to push communication over distance. Like, she could not make out the words from here, but she could hear the tone of a man's voice, not official, not the flat measured cadence of a law enforcement officer managing distance. Something rawer than that. Something that had the specific quality of a person who has decided that this is the moment everything gets said. The things that have been accumulating for 3 years of litigation and threatening letters, and a diner that sat on land that someone believed had been stolen from the people who were owed it. She could not hear the words, but Raven could hear something. Dog's head came up sharply. Her ears locked forward. Every muscle in her body went to the alert posture, not the passive sit of an explosives indication, but the rigid total body orientation of an animal that has detected a threat-level stimulus and is waiting for its handler's instruction. Aya had 4 years of reading this dog in her hands and her nervous system, and what she read right now in the quality of Raven's attention and the direction of her fixed gaze was not the chemical signature of an explosive compound. It was something moving, something in the tree line to their left, east, north-northwest toward the gap in the trees where the access road bent away from the highway. Someone who was not the man at the end of the road. Someone who had not been accounted for. Maya's hand went to the radio Henderson had clipped to her jacket. She pressed the transmit button and spoke in a voice that was entirely level and entirely serious and left no room for interpretation. I think there's a third person in the tree line, west of the access road. Raven is tracking movement. This is not the subject at the end of the road. Different direction, different position. You may have a flanking problem. There was a half-second of static. Then Reyes's voice came back and clipped. Say again, Carter. Person, north-northwest. Raven is tracking movement in the tree line right now. Another half-second. Then the radio lit up with 3 voices at once. The sudden controlled chaos of a command structure reallocating resources to a threat that had just doubled in an unexpected direction. And Maya stood at the edge of the tree line with her dog locked on to something invisible and moving in the dark. The radio stayed hot for 30 seconds, voices cutting across each other. The lieutenant calling units to repositions, directing the 2 ATF agents who had staged at the tree line's eastern edge to hold and reassess. Someone further back asking for confirmation of Maya's position. Maya kept her own channel clear. She had said what she needed to say, and she understood that the value of a radio in a multi-unit operation was silence from the people who did not need to be talking. Often had not moved. The dog's attention was locked to a point in the tree line approximately 40 degrees left of the access road, and it was not the loose, exploratory attention of an animal following curiosity. It was the fixed total commitment of a working dog that has found something real and is waiting for its handler to catch up. Aya knew the difference. She had known it since the first week of working with Raven, the way you learn to read the difference between someone who is worried and someone who is afraid. The distinction is in the quality of stillness. Did not turn it on, not yet. At this distance, in this light level, would announce her position across 300 yards of open ground, and she was not going to make that trade unless she had to. She pressed the transmit button again. Reyes. Raven is holding the indication. Northwest. I'm estimating 60 to 70 meters into the tree line from the access road bend. The movement has stopped, but the dog hasn't released. Copy, Carter. Hold your position. Do not enter the tree line. She crouched beside Raven and put her free hand flat on the ground, feeling the cold of the soil through her palm. The specific grounding sensation that she had used in the field to slow her own nervous system when everything around her was moving too fast. The earth was there. It was solid. It was not going anywhere. Everything else was variable. 40 seconds passed. Then Reyes's voice, different in texture, now compressed tight, the specific quality of a command structure absorbing a confirmed threat. Doctor, we have visual on a subject in your indicated zone. Police are moving to contain. Stay down. Maya put her hand on Raven's vest and applied gentle pressure, the downward signal, the command that meant low, stay low, and the dog flattened herself against the ground with the practiced obedience of an animal that had done this in situations where the stakes of doing it wrong were not abstract. Maya went to one knee beside her. The grass at the edge of the tree line was long enough to give partial concealment if she stayed low. Nice. She waited. The sounds that came from the tree line over the next 4 minutes were not dramatic. No shots, no shouting. The particular organized rustling of a ground team moving through underbrush, then voices two at once, then a third, the controlled verbal commands of law enforcement affecting an arrest, and then quiet eyes. Then a single bit of radio traffic from the lieutenant to Reyes, that Maya caught the edge of second suspect in custody's disarm no detonation device, found repeat no device. She released a breath. Raven lifted her head and looked at her. Good girl, Maya said. She meant it in a way that had no adequate expression beyond saying it simply and directly, which was the only way Raven understood language anyway. Up. Her knee ached from the cold ground. Eyes. She noticed it and filed it in the category of things that were going to make themselves known properly once the adrenaline metabolized. Eyes. Appeared from the direction of the access road 8 minutes later, moving with the contained energy of someone who has resolved one problem and is now running the full accounting of what it has revealed. From the diner, Reyes said without preamble. She doubled back through the woods. She was not a lookout, or not only a lookout. She had a phone with a detonator application installed. The sentence arranged itself in Maya's understanding, and the implications followed in sequence, each one arriving with the specific weight of a thing that could not be unfelt once felt. She was the trigger, Maya said. Believed if the primary subject at the access road was taken into custody or killed, she had the capability to detonate the sedan device remotely. Reyes paused. The sedan device was on a remote circuit. The kitchen device was on a timer. Different functions. The kitchen device was the initiating event, Maya said, working it through. It goes off, people evacuate the building, they evacuate into the parking lot. The sedan device is detonated remotely when the lot has maximum population. Reyes looked at her steadily. That is our current operational assessment, yes. Of the 43 people, the customers with their coffee cups and their afternoon plans. The boy who had let Raven sniff his hand, the woman with 2 children on the guardrail, on the older man who had been eating alone. The timer on the kitchen device, Maya said. That was the window. Technicians' best estimate is that it was set to detonate within 22 to 35 minutes of when it was placed. Reyes paused. The device was placed while you were being ordered to leave. Maya absorbed this. She did not do anything visible with it. She let it move through her and settle where it needed to settle, because this was not the moment to engage with what it meant about the margins they had all been operating within. And she said, at the access road, he's in custody? State police took him without incident about 4 minutes after your first radio call, and the ground units repositioned. He became aware that the situation had changed, and he did not detonate. We are assessing whether he had a device on his person or was using it as a bluff. Reyes's voice carried a specific flatness about this. The behavioral pattern suggests the latter. He wanted to talk. He talked for about 12 minutes once the officers explained his options clearly. What did he say? Enough. Reyes looked past Maya toward the diner, still lit by emergency vehicle lights, the building itself dark behind the crime scene tape. His name is Ellis Brandt, 43 years old. He's the nephew of the man who originally owned this land before Gordon Pike's predecessor purchased it. There's been a legal challenge to the sale for 11 years, not 3. The ATF database information was partial. 7 years. 2 circuit court dismissals, 1 appeals court rejection. She looked back at Maya. He believes Pike and the county circuit court judge colluded to suppress evidence in the original sale. Was there collusion? That's above my pay grade today. I can tell you is that whatever happened in that courtroom, Brandt's response was to build pipe bombs and bring his cousin's girlfriend into it, which is where criminal investigation takes precedence over civil grievance. She said it without commentary in either direction. And the report Pike filed 18 months ago, Maya said, threatening communication. Reyes's expression did not change exactly, but something around the eyes tightened. D. Sloan's department received that report, she said, bugged. It was not investigated. I'm told the reporting officer at the time was not Sloan himself, but a colleague who has since left the department. She paused. That is a conversation for tomorrow and the people above me. But it will happen. Yes, Reyes said with the certainty of someone who knows exactly what federal involvement in a county law enforcement failure looks like and has seen it before. It will happen. She walked back toward the access road. I watched her go, and then stood in the partial dark at the edge of the tree line with Raven, and let the full accounting of the day arrive, in no particular order: the coffee she had not finished, the meatloaf she had not eaten 14 hours before this, on her feet in the ICU, and somewhere behind all of that, the particular quality of standing in a diner while a man in a polo shirt told her to get out. She was very tired. Raven leaned against her. I know, Maya said. She walked back toward the perimeter. The next 2 hours had the texture of controlled aftermath, the phase of an emergency that does not look dramatic from the outside, but carries its own specific weight, the weight of documentation and decision and the slow, methodical work of understanding what has happened well enough to explain it to people who were not there. Maya gave her formal statement to a federal agent who was not Reyes, a man named Kowalski, who typed with 2 fingers and asked precise, unhurried questions and did not react visibly to any of her answers, which she read as professionalism rather than skepticism. She walked him through every moment from the parking lot to the tree line, with the same chronological, factual approach she had used with Reyes. And when he asked whether she had any documentation of Raven's certification that he could photograph for the record, she retrieved the folder from her truck for the 3rd time that evening, without complaint. The ambulance had moved forward. The 3 people she had flagged were being assessed, and she checked in with the paramedic on each of them. The older man's pressure was low but stable. The woman's tremor had reduced. The kitchen worker was breathing normally. She stood outside the ambulance and wrote her clinical observations in the margin of the paramedic's run sheet when he asked, because her handwriting was legible and her notations were organized, and it was faster than dictating. The paramedic looked at the notes and then at her. You're a combat medic? Yes. And you're at Millhaven Regional now. I see you. He was quiet for a moment. That's a lateral transfer skill-wise. Pays better and no one's shooting at me, Maya said. Laugh. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She walked back to the perimeter. Owen was waiting for her. He had been waiting, she suspected, for some time. He was standing at the edge of the diner's parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets and the specific posture of a man who is holding a sentence he is not sure how to start. Hey, said Deputy. He looked at the ground for a moment, and back at her. I owe you an apology, she agreed. He had probably expected some form of deflection, the social instinct to smooth over the other person's discomfort by preempting the apology. She had none of that instinct left after a very long day. I came in here, and I took Pike's side without asking any questions. Sloan said, I saw a woman with a dog, and I heard causing a problem, and I went in ready to remove a problem. I didn't treat you like a person who might know what she was talking about. I treated you like an inconvenience. Yes, Maya said. And if you had left, he stopped. I know the timer on that device. No, she said again. She was not going to have this particular calculation out loud with him. It lived where it lived, and that was between her and whatever she did with difficult facts. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it. She could hear that. He meant it, not the reflexive sorry of someone managing a situation, but the effortful, ungainly sorry of someone who has genuinely revised their understanding of their own behavior and does not fully know what to do with that revision yet. Thank you. Thank you, she said. Not it's fine. Not don't worry about it. Lions. thank you because he had done something that required something, and she was going to acknowledge it as that. He seemed to have more he wanted to say, but he let it go, which was the right call. There's going to be a departmental review, he said, shifting to something more practical. The failure to follow up on Pike's threat report. I wanted you to know I'm going to be honest in that review about everything that happened today, on my part in it. Good, she said. He looked at Raven. She's something, he said. She is, can I? He stopped himself. He was going to ask to pet the dog, and he had stopped himself because after everything, asking to pet the dog felt incongruous. Ahead, Maya said. He reached down carefully. Raven sniffed his hand, then permitted the contact with the air of a dog who is doing someone a favor and knows it. Owen's expression went briefly to something unguarded, just a man's hand on a dog's head, the specific uncomplicated comfort of that, and then he straightened up. I'll let you get some rest, he said. Eventually, she said, walked away. She watched him go and thought that people were on the whole more willing to be honest with themselves than their worst moments suggested given enough time and sufficient consequence. Pike found her 30 minutes later. She was sitting on the tailgate of her truck with Raven's water bowl refilled, and the dog drinking at her feet and a granola bar she had found in the center console that she was eating with the aggressive joylessness of someone consuming fuel rather than food. The meatloaf remained an abstract concept. She was going to think about that later and laugh probably. Now. Pike walked over with the specific gait of a man who has been working himself up to something for an hour and has not fully arrived at it yet. He was carrying a to-go cup, and when he got close enough, he held it out. Coffee, he said, from the backup machine in the office. They let me get some things out before they closed the scene. Hot. I don't know if it's still hot. It was a while ago. She looked the cup. She looked at him. She took the cup. Thank you, she said. He stood there with his hands now empty, which appeared to be a problem for him. He was a man who was more comfortable when he had something to do with his hands. I was wrong, he said, about the dog, about you. He paused. I've got a policy about animals in the diner. Because we had an incident 3 years ago. Someone brought in a dog that bit a customer. There was a liability issue. I put the policy in place, and I've been applying it like a blunt instrument ever since. He looked at the ground and then back at her. That's not an excuse. I know the law. I chose not to apply it because it was easier not to. Maya said, that's not an excuse. He took that without flinching. She gave him credit for it. The people in my diner today, he said, because of you and that dog. Oh, she said, not unkindly, don't make it a speech. You don't owe me a speech. You owe yourself an honest look at a pattern of behavior. And that's between you and however you decide to conduct your business from here. He was quiet for a moment. He had the expression of a man encountering bluntness that is not hostile, but is also softening itself for his comfort, and he was working out whether to be defensive about it. That's not fair, he said. The coffee's good, she said. It was barely warm and slightly bitter, and it was the best thing she had tasted in 6 hours. A ghost of something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, too complicated for that. And more. The expression of a man who recognizes absurdity when it appears in front of him. Nelson's going to say, working dogs, welcome, he said. I'm going to have it printed on the door. That would be the legal minimum, she said. Fine. He paused. I mean it anyway. He walked back toward the cluster of people at the perimeter edge. Maya drank her coffee and watched Raven finish the water, and then settle onto her side on the cold ground with the blissful pragmatism of an animal that sleeps when it can, because it has learned that it cannot always survive. The formal scene clearance took until nearly 11 o'clock that night. Maya gave 2 additional statements, one to the State Police Investigative Unit, and to a second ATF agent who had arrived from Nashville with a more comprehensive briefing document and a list of questions that overlapped significantly with Kowalski's, but were organized differently. She answered both with the same patience, not because she found the repetition enjoyable, but because she understood that parallel documentation served a purpose in federal prosecution, and she was not going to be the weak link in the chain of evidence. ATF confirmed the charge on the kitchen device at approximately 9:30. It was a pipe bomb functional, sufficient to produce serious casualties within a 30-foot radius in an enclosed space. A timer had been set. If Raven had not alerted when she did, if Maya had left when Sloan ordered her to, if she had been 10 minutes further down Route 9 when she saw the diner sign, the device would have detonated at approximately 3:08 in the afternoon, in a room that had been occupied by 43 people. Maya did not let herself do the full accounting of that. She stored it in the place where she stored things that were true and important and not useful to sit inside for extended periods, and she kept moving. The device was assessed at 11:15. Reyes came to give her the summary personally, which Maya noted as a deliberate choice. Larger charge than the kitchen device, Ray said. Detonation via the phone application recovered from the second suspect, whose name is Carla Brandt, Ellis's cousin, and who is currently in custody at the county facility and has requested a lawyer. She paused. The application had a single activation trigger. It had been armed. It was ready to use, Maya said, ready to use at the moment of maximum population in that parking lot. Reyes looked at the sedan, still surrounded by crime scene tape, visible under the portable lights the bomb squad had staged. The evacuation you initiated moved every person in that building into the parking lot. If the kitchen device had gone first and you hadn't already alerted on the sedan. No, Maya said, I'm saying it anyway. Reyes looked at her. You should know the full picture. I appreciate that. Brandt has given a partial statement. He's talking about the property case, the history, his belief that the circuit court was compromised. He's not talking about the devices. It's for his lawyer, who has also been called. Reyes' voice was the steady, factual voice of someone who has seen this pattern before and knows where it goes. He'll be charged. Carla Brandt will be charged as a co-conspirator. Sentencing guidelines on this classification are not lenient. What about the unreported threat? Maya asked. The one Pike filed 18 months ago. Police Investigative Division is opening a review of how that report was handled at the county level. Reyes said it carefully. I can't tell you where that goes, but it opens. Maya nodded. She thought about the drawer where that report had sat for 18 months, and about the conversation that Reyes had said would happen tomorrow, and about the fact that the most effective consequence for institutional failure was rarely dramatic. It was usually a long, thorough, undramatic process that produced documentation that had its own particular gravity. She was fine with that. She had learned to be fine with that. The media had been contained at the outer roadblock all evening. She was aware of the cameras and the satellite trucks in the abstract way. She was aware of most things in her peripheral environment, noted, filed, not engaged with. Had told her that ATF would be handling all media communication, and that her name would not be included in any official statement without her consent. She had given consent for a factual reference to a civilian handler and canine asset, nothing more. She was not interested in the cameras. She was interested in getting Raven fed, getting herself into a horizontal position, and sleeping until her body had processed the events of the day into whatever narrative it was going to construct of them. She was almost at her truck when Sloan appeared a final time, and this time he was not alone. The state police sergeant was with him, and a second officer Maya had seen earlier but not spoken with, and behind them, in the particular posture of a man who has been told something and is still working out where it fits in his understanding of the day, Gordon Pike. The sergeant said. She stopped. I want to make something official before you leave tonight. He looked at the small group around him and then back at her. In 17 years, I have been on 2 scenes with a confirmed explosive device. I have never been on a scene where a civilian. He paused. He was not a man who was comfortable with formal statements, and she could hear him working against that. A civilian's action was as directly decisive as yours was today. I wanted to say that to your face before you drove away. She did not deflect it. She had learned that deflecting genuine acknowledgement was its own kind of dismissal. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "The dog gets full credit in my report," he said. "Fine. I'm going to make sure that's clear in the documentation." Canine, alert your response. The second alert on the vehicle, the third indication in the tree line, all of it is going in as a continuous and decisive chain of detection. He looked at Ray. "Ivan, she's the real story here. She is," Maya agreed. "Ivan," he said, seeming to test the name. "Yes." "Ollie." Something moved across his face, the kind of expression that appears when a person has expanded their model of what something is capable of and is still absorbing the expansion. Pike said nothing. He was standing at the edge of the group, and his arms were not crossed, and his face had the specific quality of a man whose certainties about several things have been dismantled in the course of an afternoon, and who has not yet rebuilt anything to replace them. She looked at him for a moment, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, and somehow that had its own completeness. Owen shook her hand. She was surprised by it, the formality of it, and then she wasn't. He shook it with both of his, which told her something about where he was in the process of reordering himself. She got into the truck. Raven jumped into the back, circled once, and settled. Maya sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and the engine off, and the noise of the scene still audible through the glass. The radio traffic, the vehicles, the distant sound of someone giving instructions to the media pool at the roadblock. Then she started the engine. She pulled out of the parking lot at 11:47. 9 was open south of the roadblock. She drove at exactly the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, Raven's breathing audible and steady in the back. She had driven about 12 miles when she pulled into a gas station, went inside, bought the largest coffee they had and a sandwich she did not look at carefully, and sat in the parking lot and ate half of it before she remembered she had not called the hospital. She owed her charge nurse a message. She was going to be extremely late filing her post-shift notes, and she had missed the handoff completely, and she was going to have to explain briefly and factually why she had spent the evening at a federal explosives scene instead of doing her documentation. She thought about how to word that message for approximately 45 seconds. Then she set the sandwich down and picked up her phone, and as she was composing the message, the news notification appeared at the top of her screen. Local Tennessee news outlet, alert pushed 11 minutes ago, a headline, using the words bomb plot. Thwarted Ashford County diner, and below it the first line of the article, which she did not read fully but caught enough of to see the phrase civilian nurse and military K9 before she locked the screen. Science the match to her charge nurse. She finished half the coffee. She looked at Raven's reflection in the rearview mirror, the dog's dark eyes open, watchful, patient. She pulled back onto Route 9. The hospital was 40 minutes away, and the road was mostly empty this late, and she drove with the particular clarity of a mind that has spent everything it had and arrived, on the other side of that expenditure, at something quiet and flat and not unpleasant. She was not thinking about the timer on the kitchen device. She was not thinking about the 43 people. She was not thinking about what Pike had said, or what the sergeant had said, or the way Sloane's hands had wrapped around hers when he shook it. She was thinking in the specific limited way of a person who is very tired and driving carefully about nothing more than the road in front of her and the dog behind her and the distance between where she was and where she was going. She was 9 miles from home when her phone rang through the truck's Bluetooth, a number she didn't recognize with a Nashville area code, and she almost let it go to voicemail. She almost did something made her answer. "Carter," she said. A pause. Then a voice she did not recognize, male, careful, with the specific cadence of someone who has been waiting to make this call and is now uncertain how to begin. Carter. "My name is Thomas Waverly. I'm an attorney with Waverly and Associates in Nashville." Another pause. "I represent the estate of Harold Brandt." She was quiet. "I understand. This may be a strange time to call," he said. "But I've been following the events in Ashford County this evening, and there's something I need to tell you." Something. that I should have told someone a long time ago. His voice had the particular texture of a man carrying a thing he has carried too long and has finally decided to put down. About the property sale, about Gordon Pike, about what the circuit court was shown and what it wasn't. Ian shifted in the back seat. Maya's hands tightened on the wheel. "Guys," she said, "I'm listening." She pulled the truck onto the shoulder of Route 9 and cut her speed to 0 volts and sat with the engine running and the heater moving air through the cabin and Thomas Waverley's voice in the speakers telling her lines, something that rearranged the shape of the entire day. 5. He talked for 11 minutes. She did not interrupt him once. What he said was this. Harold Brandt had owned the land that Redwood Grill currently occupied, along with 14 adjacent acres, for 31 years before his death. His will had been clear the property was to be divided equally between his nephew Ellis and a land trust established for conservation purposes. But the circuit court had been shown was a different document, a codicil, dated 8 months before Harold's death, that superseded the original will and transferred the entirety of the land to a private sale, facilitated by a real estate broker with an existing relationship with the circuit court judge, a man named Frederick Howell, who had retired 3 years ago and was now living comfortably in Sarasota, Florida. The sale had been made at below market value to a holding company. The holding company had sold to Pike's predecessor. Had inherited clean title. The codicil was fraudulent, Waverly said. I know that, because I drafted Harold Brandt's original will. I know his handwriting. I know his intentions, and I know that the document the court accepted was not consistent with either. He paused. I filed a formal objection. At the time it was dismissed. I was told the matter was settled, and then another pause longer. I was contacted by Judge Howell and advised in terms that were not ambiguous that pursuing the matter further would have consequences for my practice. Aya stared at the dark road ahead of her. You're telling me you were threatened, she said. I'm telling you. I made a choice that I have not been comfortable with for 11 years. His voice had the flat, slight, papery quality of someone reading something from a list they have rehearsed too many times. Brandt made terrible choices tonight. What he did cannot be defended, and I'm not attempting to defend it. But the thing that made him believe violence was his only remaining option was a real injustice that I had the ability to document and chose not to. Why are you calling me? Maya asked. Because you're not part of the system, he said. You're not law enforcement. You're not in the county legal structure. You're not anyone Howell or the people around him have leverage over. He paused. And because what happened tonight is going to produce a federal investigation that will eventually reach the property records. And when it does, I would rather have already spoken to someone outside the existing structure. To talk to Agent Reyes, Maya said. ATF Nashville. If she'll take the call, I know I wanted to make this call first. A long pause. She could hear him breathing. Because you're the reason there are 43 people alive in Ashford County tonight, he said. And the case that produced the man who tried to kill them is a case I could have ended 11 years ago. It's a debt I needed to acknowledge to someone who wasn't a lawyer or a federal agent before I became officially a witness. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck moved past on Route 9, and the sound of it rose and fell and left the silence more complete. Reyes, she said. Give her everything I will. And Waverly. She paused. For what it's worth, you called. That's where you are now. What you do from here is what matters. She ended the call. She sat for 30 seconds with her hands flat on the wheel and the heater running and Raven's breathing steady in the back seat. Then she picked up her phone and texted Reyes a single line. Thomas Waverly, Nashville attorney, is going to contact you tonight. Take the call. He has documented evidence related to the original property fraud. It's significant. She sent it. She put the truck back in drive. She did not call anyone else. There was no one she needed to call tonight. It was going to be a complicated and lengthy and probably exhausting day, and she needed to be functional for it. And the only path to functional was the one that involved getting home. She got home at 12:43 in the morning, parked in the driveway of the small rental house outside Millhaven that she had been telling herself for 6 months she was eventually going to replace with something more permanent, fed Raven. Eyes stood in the shower until the water went cold and was asleep, 11 minutes after she got horizontal. She slept without dreaming, which was not always the case, and which she registered as something like grace. The call from Reyes came at 7:14 the following morning. While Maya was on her second coffee and her first attempt at actual breakfast, Raven on her mat by the back door in the flat rectangle of morning light. Last night, Reyes said. 4 hours. He has documentation going back to the original will. Drafts. Correspondence, notes from the conversation with Howell. He kept everything a pause. People who know they're doing the wrong thing often keep records. I've never fully understood it, but it's consistent. What happens now? Maya asked. What happens now is that this morning I referred the property fraud evidence to the DOJ Civil Division and the Tennessee State Bar's disciplinary office. Howell is retired. Retired judges are still subject to bar discipline and civil liability. Reyes's voice had the contained precision of someone who is not allowing themselves to be satisfied yet, but can see satisfaction as a future state. The county official who received and buried Pike's threat report has been suspended pending review. That's a local law enforcement matter. But the state police investigative unit is handling it, and they're not going to be gentle. A brief pause. Pike is cooperating fully with the property fraud investigation. He has documentation of his own purchase that supports his claim. He was unaware of the fraudulent provenance. Whether that holds up is for the civil process to determine, but at this stage he's a witness, not a subject. Aya turned her coffee cup in her hands and Ellis Brandt. Federal charges, multiple counts conspiracy, use of explosive materials, attempted mass murder. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Nashville is handling it. And his cousin Carla has agreed to a cooperation agreement. Reyes paused. What he did cannot be mitigated by the legitimate grievance underneath it. I was clear on that, and I am clear on that. But the investigation into the underlying fraud will proceed regardless of how his prosecution goes. It reach anyone. Howell is 71 and in Florida and has an attorney already, Reyes said. It reaches him specifically in a way that produces criminal accountability. I can't tell you that. Accountability is more likely. The bar discipline is certain. She paused. Justice is not always the shape we want it to be. I know, Maya said she did know. 18 months. Out of a military system that had its own complicated relationship with accountability, had given her a very specific education in the difference between the outcome that was right and the outcome that was available. One more thing, Reyes said. The ATF is submitting a formal commendation for Raven's certification record. It's going to the Department of Defense's MWD program alumni files. It won't change anything practically, but it's documented. She'll be very unimpressed, Maya said. She could hear something in Reyes's voice that was as close to warmth as the agent had expressed across the entire previous 24 hours. Upply, how are you? The question surprised her by arriving. She had not expected Reyes to ask it, and she did not have an instant answer for it, which was itself information. I'm going to be all right, she said. You should take a few days, Reyes said. Advice. I have a shift on Thursday. Take until Thursday, Maya looked at Raven. The dog was watching a bird through the bag glass with the focused academic attention she gave to birds. She had never once attempted to pursue one, but she studied them with the serious interest of a scholar who finds a subject intellectually engaging without any intention of publishing. I'll think about it, she said. Do that. Reyes paused one final time. What you did yesterday, the chain of decisions start to finish. Luck. And it was not instinct. It was trained judgment used correctly under pressure. She said it the way she said most things, directly, without decoration, because decoration would have cost it something. I've been doing this for 16 years. I don't say that to many people. Thank you, Agent Reyes. Dana, another surprise. I absorbed it. Thank you, Dana, she said. The story broke fully in the news cycle by 9 o'clock that morning and had reached the national feeds by noon. Maya did not watch it. She was aware of it, the way she was aware of weather. She knew it was happening, and she did not need to stand in it to understand that it was real. 5. Her phone had accumulated 47 notifications by the time she turned it face down on the kitchen table, a number of them from Millhaven regional colleagues who had seen the news, several from numbers she didn't recognize, from her charge nurse, that said simply, "Take Thursday too." Coverage. You earned it. She took the 2 days. Right. She spent them mostly at home, mostly outside when the weather permitted, throwing a ball for Raven in the small backyard, until the dog decided she had made her point about the ball and retired to her mat. 5. She filed her incident report for Millhaven Regional, even days off produced paperwork. It was one of the consistent features of the healthcare system that she had stopped finding surprising, and she wrote it carefully and accurately, and kept it to exactly what was clinically relevant and professionally documented. She took Raven to the vet on Wednesday morning for a post-operational wellness check, which she did after every extended working period, because working dogs were not machines, and she was not going to treat Raven like one. A small, serious woman named Dr. Buck, who had been Raven's veterinarian since Maya adopted her, conducted the examination with the thorough attention she always gave, and declared the dog healthy, slightly dehydrated from the previous day's exertion. And she said this last part with the specific wryness of someone who has treated this particular dog often enough to have opinions about her, apparently very pleased with herself. 5. She should be, Maya said. She found 2 bombs, Dr. Buck said. Technically 3 indications, Maya said. Third was a person, not a device, but yes, Dr. Buck looked at Raven with the expression of someone revising their professional assessment upward. She said 3. The vet wrote something in the file. Up. How are you? It was the second time in 2 days someone had asked her that question in a way that required a real answer. Ethan's getting there, Maya said. It was more honest than "I'm fine," and less complicated than the full truth, which was that she was somewhere in the middle of processing an experience that had layers. The tactical layer, which had resolved cleanly, the physical layer, which was mostly a matter of sleep, and the layer beneath both of those, the one that lived in the part of her that had been trained to stay operational, and was now in the relative quiet of 2 days off, beginning to feel the things it had not allowed itself to feel during the event itself. Tired. Not the tired of one bad night. The tired of someone who had been running on discipline and training for a very long time and had arrived in the particular stillness of 2 days off in November at the question of what she was running toward rather than what she was running from. She did not have a clean answer to that question. She was starting to think that the absence of a clean answer was not a problem to be solved, as it was just where she was, and where she was not the worst place she had ever been by a very significant margin. She went back on Thursday. The ICU at Millhaven Regional was the same as it always was, organized, demanding, full of people in their worst moments being cared for by other people at their professional best. The specific combination of urgency and routine that had drawn her here. After the discharge processing office handed her Raven's paperwork, and she had needed to find a reason to stay busy that wasn't going to destroy her. It was not a gentle environment. It was not supposed to be. It was exactly what it was, and it required exactly what she had to give, and there was something clarifying about that. For charge nurse, a broad-shouldered man named Patrick, who had been running the ICU with gruff efficiency for 8 years, and expressed affection primarily through bluntness and the occasional provision of good coffee, met her at the station when she came on shift. Human, he said. I slept good. He handed her a tablet with her patient assignments. 3 has a post-surgical complication we've been watching. Stable, but the family is not Bay 12. Patrick, she said. He stopped. Thank you for the extra days. He looked at her for a moment with the expression he used when he was going to say something that mattered and was not going to say it elaborately. Thank me, he said. You stopped 43 people from dying on your day off. Taking Thursday was the least we could do. He paused. 3. She went to Bay 3. She worked the shift the way she worked every shift, methodically, attentively, the specific quality of presence that the ICU required. 5. Where the margin between a patient's current state and a significantly worse state was sometimes measured in minutes, and the person watching the monitors was the entire distance between those two outcomes. 5. She did not think about Route 9. She did not think about Redwood Grill. 5. She thought about the patient in Bay 3, whose post-surgical blood pressure was doing something that required her full attention for 40 minutes, and about the family in Bay 7, who needed someone to sit with them and explain what stable meant in terms that were honest without being frightening, and about the quiet, ongoing work of being exactly where she was. At the end of the shift, she was tired in the clean, functional way that comes from useful work, rather than the accumulated, directionless exhaustion of the days before. I held her notes. She changed out of her scrubs. She walked to her truck in the hospital parking garage and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone had 2 messages she had not read during the shift. The first was from Sloan. It was brief. Departmental review started today. I gave my full statement. It's going to be ugly, but it should be. She read it twice and then put the phone face down on the seat. He was doing what he said he would do. People occasionally did exactly what they said they would do, and she thought that was worth noting when it happened, even if she noted it privately and moved on. The second message was from a number she didn't recognize with a 615 area code. Asheville. She opened it. Miss Carter, this is Thomas Waverly. I gave my full formal statement to ATF and the DOJ Civil Division last night. My law partner is handling our practice while I take a leave of absence to cooperate with the investigation. I also filed a voluntary disclosure with the Tennessee State Bar this morning. I wanted you to know. T20 set the phone down and started the engine. The Tennessee State Bar suspended Frederick Howell's law license posthumously. He had died 11 years ago, she learned, not retired. And the license suspension was a formal record in an official register that had been maintained as though he were still alive. The civil case was more complicated. The property fraud finding produced a civil liability claim against Howell's estate, which was itself the subject of ongoing litigation. That reached a resolution that provided anything meaningful to the Brandt family was a question that would take years to answer. Alice Brandt was indicted on 7 federal counts, including attempted murder in the first degree. He entered a not guilty plea. His attorney filed a motion to introduce the property fraud as mitigating context. The federal judge ruled it inadmissible as a defense, but noted for the record that the underlying civil matter was proceeding in a separate venue. Brandt cooperated, pled guilty to conspiracy charges, and received a reduced sentence with conditions. The county official who had verified threat report was terminated following the state police review. The review also identified 2 additional instances in which the same official had failed to act on reported threats over a 4-year period. Both of those files were referred to the state attorney general. Gordon Pike's title to the Redwood Grill property remained legally valid, a function of the bona fide purchaser doctrine and the fact that the court found no evidence he had knowledge of the fraudulent codicil. He did not keep the property. He sold it in January, not under legal compulsion, but of his own decision, quietly to a local family who had wanted the location for 20 years. He told Sloan, who told no one except Maya in a brief phone call, that he could not walk through that kitchen anymore without thinking about what had been in it, and that there were things you could not simply decide to stop thinking about, and so you changed the surrounding circumstance instead. She thought was unexpectedly one of the more self-aware things Pike had ever said. The sign he had promised went on the door of his new establishment, a smaller place on the other side of Ashford County, a coffee shop, rather than a full diner opened in March. Fucking dogs welcome. She knew because Sloan sent her a photograph of it with no comment, which she found she did not need him to elaborate on. She did not seek any of this out. Updates. The ups came through Sloan, through Reyes. Through the occasional news notification she no longer automatically dismissed. And through the formal federal commendation that arrived in her mailboxes in December, in a manila envelope with a Department of Justice return address, stating her civilian assistance in an active federal investigation and formally acknowledging Raven's detection capability. It was a document and not a ceremony, which was exactly what she would have wanted if anyone had asked her, which no one had because they knew her well enough by then not to suggest otherwise. She put it in the folder with Raven's other certifications. There was a moment in January that she would carry longer than most. She was coming off a night shift, 3 in the morning parking garage. The specific quality of that hour, where the building was quiet enough to hear the HVAC system and her own footsteps and nothing else, when she stopped at her truck and stood with her keys in her hand and thought about the diner, not the device in the trash container, not the sedan, not the access road or the tree line, or Waverly's voice in the truck speakers on the dark stretch of Route 9. She thought about the coffee she had ordered and not been allowed to drink. She thought about how close she had come to driving past the sign. She thought about Raven's nose, dropping toward the kitchen floor with the lock-committed certainty of an animal that has no concept of what it means to second-guess itself, that has only training and instinct, and the complete undefended willingness to follow both wherever they lead. She had always trusted Raven from the first week. From the first time the dog had given a training alert in a parking structure outside Fort Belvoir and Maya had looked at what the dog had found and understood that this animal was worth more than most people's certainty. She had never once chosen her own doubt over Raven's knowing. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Not what she had done in the diner, not the decisions she had made under pressure, not the experience and training that had made those decisions possible. The thing she kept coming back to was simpler than any of that. And it was this: when the room told her she was wrong, she had looked at her dog instead of the room. That was all. That was the entire thing. The room had been Pike with his arms out. The room had been Sloan with his hand on the booth. The room had been the weight of 2 people with authority in a small space deciding that she was a problem to be removed, and there had been a moment she was honest with herself about this. Because dishonesty with yourself was expensive, and she was not in a position to afford it. There had been a moment where she had started to comply, where she had picked up her jacket, where the accumulated pressure of being told that her presence was wrong had begun to do what accumulated pressure eventually does to most people. And then Raven had stood up. The dog had not consulted the room. The dog had no mechanism for consulting the room, no ability to feel the social weight of 2 authorities aligned against her. No framework for deciding that the signal she was receiving was less credible than the opinions of the humans surrounding her. She had simply followed what she knew, without apology, without negotiation, without waiting for permission. Maya had spent a lot of her life in environments where the expectation was that she would be smaller than she was, less certain, more willing to defer the specific knowledge she had earned through means that were neither comfortable nor theoretical, and defer it to people who had not earned it but occupied spaces that made deference seem reasonable. She had learned to navigate those environments with the controlled, deliberate patience of someone who understood that the fight worth having was not every fight, that the moment worth asserting yourself was not every moment. But she had also learned, and this was the thing she could not have articulated before that afternoon on Route 9, the thing she had known in some structural way, but had not found the language, for she had learned that there was a specific kind of room that was wrong. Wrong in the way that difference of opinion is wrong, or wrong in the way that institutional imperfection is wrong, or wrong in the gentle, forgivable way that most human errors are wrong. There was a specific kind of room that was wrong in a way that had real casualties if you let it win. A room that told you to be less than what you were at the precise moment, that what you were was the only thing standing between everyone in it and something catastrophic. That room. The only right decision was Raven's. Awful. What you know, go where the signal leads. Do not negotiate the truth of what you're detecting with people who are not in a position to detect it. She got in the truck. Raven was watching her from the back seat. Maya said. Raven settled her chin on her paws. Maya drove. Spring came to Millhaven in the particular way. Gradually, then all at once, the way most things that have been waiting a long time finally arrived. The trees on the road between the hospital and her house went from bare to budded to full without any single morning being the moment it happened, just the accumulated effect of enough warmth applied consistently over enough days. She renewed the lease on the house. She had been telling herself for months it was temporary, that she was going to find something better, something that felt more like a decision and less like a placeholder. She renewed it and understood for the first time without the mild accompanying dissatisfaction that this was where she was. That was not a consolation. It was just what was true. She adopted a second dog in April, a three-legged shepherd mix from the county shelter, a younger dog, with enormous ears and the specific fearless energy of an animal that had already survived something difficult and had no interest in being precious about it. She named him Atlas. Raven regarded him for 4 days with the evaluating attention of a senior employee assessing a new hire, and on the 5th day permitted him to sleep against her side, which Maya interpreted as ratification. She did not become someone who gave speeches. She did not become someone who went to community events and accepted plaques and talked about her experience as an example. She was asked twice, and she said no both times politely, because she understood what those events were for, and she did not think she was the right vessel for it. The story was not about her, exactly. It was about a dog that followed a signal and a woman who trusted that signal, and a room full of people who had not yet understood what was happening in time to make a different choice. The version of the story she thought worth telling was not the version that centered her eyes. It was the version that asked what you do when the room is wrong. Whether you can hold your own knowing against the force of a space that is organized around a different conclusion. Whether the training you have, whatever form that training takes, wherever you acquired, it is something you treat as real when it matters. Or whether you let the pressure of other people's certainty erode it at the exact moment it is most needed. She thought about that often. She thought about the fraction of a second between picking up her jacket and Raven standing up. She thought about how many times in how many small rooms she had not stayed. Let herself be made less than what she was by people who were more comfortable with her being less. She was not going to perform regret about that. Most of those moments had been navigated the way they needed to be, with the pragmatism of someone who was choosing her battles, because she understood that resources were finite, and some fights cost more than they produced. That was real, and she did not apologize for it, but she thought about the boy on the guardrail, holding out his hand, palm down, because she had told him to let the dog come to him. Raven had rested her chin on his palm with the complete simplicity of an animal that does not hedge trust once it's extended. The way the boy's face had changed, the specific, irreversible expansion of a child who has just learned that something larger than they expected is willing to meet them. That was the picture she kept. Not the bomb in the trash container. Not the perimeter tape and the satellite trucks and the manila envelope from the Department of Justice. The boy's face, the dog's chin on his palm, the quiet, enormous generosity of a trained animal choosing to be gentle with someone who needed it. She was a nurse. She had been a combat medic. She was someone who had come home from places that had extracted things from her that she had not finished accounting for, and who had built a life in a small house, outside a medium-sized city with 2 dogs and a renewal lease in a parking garage. She walked through at 3 in the morning because the night shift paid better, and she had never fully slept, recalibrated to sleeping the way most people slept. She was 30 years old. She was on most days as okay as the day required her to be, and occasionally more okay than that. She was not a hero. Heroes were a story. People told about someone else, so they didn't have to ask what they would have done themselves. 5. She was a woman who had a dog with a specific skill and had trusted that skill at the moment it mattered. 5. The difference between that and not doing it had been one decision made in about 4 seconds, in the middle of a very ordinary argument about whether a dog was allowed in a diner. 4 seconds. 5. She thought about that sometimes when she was coming off a long shift or sitting in the parking garage at 3 in the morning, or watching Atlas figure out the geometry of the dog door with his 3 legs and his enormous ears and his refusal to be discouraged by the engineering challenge. 4 seconds. That was all the gap between what happened and what could have happened. 4 seconds of not complying, 4 seconds of looking at her dog instead of the room. 5. She had spent a long time being told in various ways in various rooms that her knowledge was provisional. Her certainty required credentials, and her credentials required verification, and her verification required the approval of someone who had not been where she had been and done what she had done, but occupied a space that made their approval feel necessary. 5. She had navigated that for years with patience and precision, and the kind of quiet endurance that doesn't look like strength because it doesn't make noise. She was done being quiet about what she knew, not loud, not combative, not performing anything for anyone's benefit. Just done pretending that the things she had learned in the field and in the ICU and in the specific, irreplaceable education of trusting an animal that cannot speak but can tell the truth. Done. Pretending those things were less than what they were, because the room was organized around a more comfortable conclusion. Ivan was asleep on the back porch. Atlas was beside her, his 3 legs tucked under him in the specific arrangement he had devised for maximum contact with the warm concrete. Afternoon light came through the trees in the way it did in spring in Tennessee, green-filtered, moving, full of that particular quality of light that makes even ordinary things seem like they're worth looking at. Aya stood in the doorway and looked at her dogs. She thought about all the rooms she had been told to leave. She thought about the one she hadn't. She went inside to make coffee, and the screen door closed behind her with the quiet sound of a thing returning to where it belonged.